Okay, so within this video, I'm going to talk about biodiversity. So what you should be able to answer at the end of this unit is how and why do organisms interact with their environment and what are the effects of those interactions. So what we're going to talk about throughout here is abiotic factors and biotic factors and how they allow for biodiversity to occur and how we allow for a healthy environment within an ecosystem. So first we're going to talk about the interdependence within an ecosystem. So inter means within and dependence means they're depending upon each other. So an ecosystem actually includes both living and non-living things. So it's talking about how water, soil, and air affect the biotic factors, the living things within the ecosystem. So in order to really understand what an ecosystem is made up of, we must think of the hierarchy of just life in general. So first we start off with organisms. So this would be you or I. Then we move up to populations. So talking about same species but within an area or grouped together. Communities, so different populations grouped together. So you have penguins and then you have polar bears and just different things. So different populations make up communities. And ecosystems are really where we see life interact with multiple things. So we're not just talking about living things here, we're also talking about abiotic factors, non-living things. Then we have biomes. Biomes are comprised of organisms that are in an ecosystem that will be able to thrive together, but it's also talking about a place as well as precipitation. And finally, we end with biosphere. Biosphere is talking about all the biodiversity of life. Bio simply means life, sphere means ball, so it's just talking about the world as a whole. So to reiterate those, an organism would be talking about just one organism in general. So one that has a specific role, such as its niche, or in the place that it actually lives would be its habitat. So Nemo's niche would be to maybe clean the sea anemone so that way it functions correctly, and its habitat would also be the sea anemone, but really a niche is a role that an organism plays, and I'll touch on this a little bit later. So thinking about us, your habitat would be at school, a classroom. Your niche would be to be a student. Population. So population, again, is a group of the same species that occupy the same place at the same time. So this would be Nemo and his dad, Marlin. A community would be a group of a variety of different species that are occupying the same place. It's not necessarily talking about the coral reef, it's just talking about the organisms. And then we bring it into an ecosystem. So an ecosystem is a specific area, such as a coral reef, that consists of abiotic factors, which are things that are non-living, and biotic factors, which things that are living. So hopefully you see within this picture it's comprised of two things. A biome is a specific ecosystem that's large, that's subjective to a specific temperature and amount of precipitation or area that consists of variety of ecosystems. So a biome for that would be a coral reef. Here are other biomes listed that you'll see throughout textbooks and throughout the internet. There's 9. So a tundra is classified as the upper part of the northern hemisphere. It is subject to frozen permafrost, but it also allows for some vegetation to grow. Then you have the taiga, like the boreal forest, places like Canada. The grassland, the temperate grassland can vary, but it's more in the north. The desert, you are familiar with that one. Tropical rainforest, there are different classifications of those based upon the amount of precipitation and the vegetation found there. And then we have deciduous forests. These are forests that allow for changing of the leaves among the trees. So you actually have the leaves that go through seasons. They're green, they're orange, and then they go back to green, and they fall off, that kind of thing. So these are all the biomes listed. And then we move on, to the biosphere. So again, the biosphere is comprised of everything on Earth. Any part of Earth that supports life, that would be held within the realm of the biosphere. Now again, just to reiterate these, abiotic and biotic factors. Biotic factors are anything that is living, it's viable, it supports life, it will reproduce to produce more life. Now, ways in which we see this within an ecosystem are through interactions among creatures. So we'll see that in commensalism, mutualism, predation, competition, and parasitism. So you're actually going to watch videos on all of these throughout this unit so that way you can see them firsthand and see how it is organisms actually interact with each other, and then how it actually affects the organism as a whole. And then we'll move into abiotic factors. Abiotic factors are things that, such as soil, the weather, the rain, the wind, that affect biotic things or living things in the grand scheme of things and allow an ecosystem to thrive or not thrive. Moving on, we're going to talk about how organisms interact with each other. So a food web is a connected realm of everything within an ecosystem, and how things kind of beget things, or how they eat, or what they eat and who they eat. It's kind of like the circle of life. If you ever watched The Lion King before, the circle of life, the cycle of life, that is what a food web is. But it actually can be simplified even more to what we call a food chain. So a food chain would start off with like a grass, a producer, move to a small consumer, a larger consumer, and then even larger consumer, and larger, and the cycle goes on and on. So you can have several food chains within a food web because you are not subject to having the same thing eat the same thing. It can be a variety of different things. Now, talking about ecological pyramids. Ecological pyramids, there's one to the left. You have the bottom, which are decomposers. Again, soil is an abiotic factor, but decomposers are biotic factors. But what happens here, the soil is where the decomposers thrive. This is where it's eating on dead nutrients. So if we didn't have the soil, then decomposers wouldn't have a place to regenerate non-living things. So this is a key part of this ecological pyramid. So within this ecological pyramid, you're going to see and notice that as I move up the ecological pyramid, it's going to actually get smaller. I have less people on top and more towards the bottom. So the bottom we call producers. They're organisms, in this case plants, that undergo photosynthesis. Above that, you have small consumers, which we call primary consumers because they're the first level, and these consist normally of herbivores. Then we have secondary consumers, which can be carnivores or omnivores, depending upon how big they are. And then at the very top, you're going to have a top carnivore, something, or omnivore, something that is going to overpower everything within the ecological pyramid. Now, what's unique about this is, thinking of that concept of the circle of life, everything within this ecological pyramid is going to get recycled back into the soil. So what happens is plants, they receive 100% of the sun's energy because they're at the bottom and they go through photosynthesis. As I move upward, the herbivores are actually only going to get 10% of the energy from the sun, because if you notice here, 90% is going to be lost as heat. And then again, if a frog, say, eats an insect, it only is going to obtain that 10%, and 90% is going to be lost as heat. In the actual hunting of organisms, you're losing energy because you're using energy in that matter. So everything within this world follows the first law of thermodynamics, is matter cannot be created nor destroyed. It simply is just getting recycled over and over again. So just to put it in perspective, here's a sample problem. So if I start at the bottom, my producers have 1,000 kilojoules of energy. I know that 10% is only going to be passed up to the next trophic level. These are called trophic levels. As I move up, I'm only going to get 10%, and I'm going to lose 90 as heat. So what's 1,000? Take 1,000. What's 90% of that? So 900 kilojoules is going to be lost as heat. And how I can figure out what this trophic level amount is 1,000 minus 900, and I get, or 1,000 minus 900 would be 100. So same things apply. I'm only going to obtain 10 within this next level. 90% is going to be lost as heat, so 90 would go here, and 100 minus 90 is 10. And then for the next one, 90% will be lost as heat, so I'll have 9, and then my top layer, I'm only having 1 kilojoule of energy. So as I move up these trophic levels, again, trophic is just talking about the energy or the organism at hand. As I move up these levels, the inner number is going to decrease substantially. You're only obtaining 10%, and the same thing is happening out here. 90% is getting lost as heat, and it's losing that amount every single time. So again, reiterating in ecosystems, you have organisms that carry out specific roles and the habitat in which they live. So in cases like this, when habitats or ecosystems are destroyed, it's greatly going to affect our ecological pyramids. If I lose a whole trophic level, or if I lose a whole layer of organisms, it's going to drastically affect the niche and the habitat of future organisms, which could then cause or lead to extinction. So what happens is we as consumers, or organisms as consumers, we overconsume items in the grand scheme of things. Resources are depleted within specific areas, and that causes a whole world of chaos within an ecosystem, within the biome, and even the biosphere as a whole. So what we have to do and what we have to be mindful of is making sure that if animals are going to go extinct, we make steps or take precautions in order to eliminate that. So this is just an introduction of where we're going to go, but you'll get to see how a loss of species or the bringing back of species will allow for ecosystems to thrive and be successful. So I hope that's helpful.